Hakadosh Boker Tov, Masechet Megillah Daf 9A1. We are talking about the differences between tefillin and mezuzot. Yeah, we're talking about kam begufan shelanu, kam begufan shelahem. What does that mean? There's going to be a difference between gufin shelanu, gufin shelahem. Gufin shelanu, gufin shelahem means is that there's going to be a difference that when you're going to have a case where it's in the Hebrew letters, but it's in the alphabet of the meaning, like the let's say, for example, Ladino or Yiddish that we said, that it's going to be the Hebrew letters, but it's going to be in written in Hebrew, Tav Ashurit, right? No, but it has to be in the Hebrew letters. Yes. Phonetic, the way that it's written, but it's in Hebrew letters. As long as it's going to be in Hebrew letters, that's going to be permitted. If it's not going to be in the Hebrew letters, so then that's what's going to be a problem. Amale Abaye. This is where we're starting to today. Okay, Amale Abaye. Yeah, Teta Mudalef, 91. Amale Abaye. B'may ukimta leahi begufan shelahen. Why do you say that the Braita is talking about, right, with gufan shelahen means their letters? Right, he says, Ma idya mikra shekatvo targum, betargum shekatvo mikra. When do you have a case of mikra shekatvo targum or targum shekatvo mikra? When do you have such a case? So says the Gemara, you have that case. Afilu mikra shekatvo mikra betargum shetargum targum nami. He says, what did you just say? You said if you have mikra, which is written targum, or targum, which is written mikra, this is the halacha. He says, one second, even if it was written mikra for mikra and targum for targum, you still have a problem. When is going to be the problem? The problem is going to be, if it's going to be what? If it's going to be in a different language, right? The haktanya shechtavenu ashurit ala sefer v'dio. You need it ashurit ala sefer and v'dio. Ashurit means in the Hebrew language, right? It has to be written in Hebrew letters, right? Ala sefer means on parchment, right? Uvidyo means with ink, right? Just like what we did last night. Last night we had a Safrut program, a workshop, where the boys came and they were, right, there was a big bite. Yeah, they were coming and they were writing, right? So he comes and he says, Ela la kashya. But rather there's no question. What's the question? Ha kerabbanan, ha kerashbag. It all depends according to Shitat Rabbanan, that according to Rabbanan, Sfarim nichtavim b'chol lashon. You're allowed to write in whatever language that you want. It's only tefillin and mezuzot that you cannot. But a Sefer Torah, Tanakh, you could write it whatever you want. But according to Rashbag, no, it was only permitted in Yevanit. It wasn't permitted in any language. So says the Gemara, Ik Rashbag, if you're going to tell me now like it's like Rashbag, Hayika Yevanit. You could still write it though in Yevanit. You're right, you can't write it in every language, but you could write it in Yevanit. So says the Gemara, Elala Kashia, but rather what? It's not a question. Kam b'sfarim, kam b'tfilin mezuzot. When we came and we said in the Mishnah, we're talking about Sfarim. Sfarim are written in every language, right? Tefillin and mezuzot are not written only in Ashurit. So says the Gemara, Tefillin and mezuzot, Maitama. What's the reasoning why Tefillin and mezuzot cannot be written in any language? What's the difference? Sifanim, Tanakh, you can write it whatever you want. When it comes to Tefillin and mezuzot, right, you can't. Why not? Says the Gemara, Mishum dichtiv behu, as it's written, Vehayu. When it says Vayu, it means it's going to be Bavayatan, the way that it is. Meaning there's a special din in Tefillin and Mezuzot that since it says Vayu, Bavayatan means the exact same way that it was, that it is, that's the way it is. You cannot change that. So therefore in Tefillin and Mezuzot, since it's written Vayu, because remember also in the Tefillin and also in Mezuzot, it's written Parashat Shema. Since it's written Vayu, it has to be the same way that it is. You cannot change it. That's why Tefillin Mezuzot are a special din. You cannot write it in any other language. Yeah? So he comes and he says, My Targum sheketavo mikra ika. He says, what exactly is the Targum that you wrote it as mikra? So he says, right, Bishlama Torah, right? I understand. What is the Targum which is written in the mikra? Where do we find Targum in the Torah? So he says, I could actually find it. You know where? Yegar Sa'aduta. Yegar Sa'aduta is actually Targum. Yeah, the Yaakov Lavan. There it's actually Targum. So you could have it. Ela hacha, but here, when we're talking about Tefillin Mezuzot, my Targumika. Where's their Targum? Where's their Targum in Tefillin Mezuzot? Remember, Tefillin, you have 4 parashiot. Right? What are the 4 parashiot of Tefillin? Yeah.
Kadesh li.
היה חיוויך, שמה, והיה עם שמוע. 4 parashiyot. In mezuzot, how many parashiyot do you have?
Shema only. No, 2.
והיה עם שמוע, 2. Yeah, so it's 2 out of the 4. So therefore, where's the targum over there? I understand in the Torah, there's targum. Yigar saduta. That is targum for the word galed, chazak baruch, ukatzin. Yeah, galed. Gal-ed. This gal, this pile is an ed, is a testimony, is a witness. So therefore, it's saduta, right? Anan sade, saduta is witnesses. Okay? But he says, my targumika, where's the targum inside the tefillin mezuzot? So says the Gemara, elala kasha, it's not a question. Kan be-megillah, kan be-sfarim. He says it all depends, right? Whether it's going to be the Megillah or Sefarim. Why? In Megillat Esther, which is not metameh yadayim unless it's written as shurit, that's what we're talking about until now. And here we're talking about Sfarim. What does that mean? Where because of this question, we come and we're trying to answer it splitting up. Before we were trying to split it up between Tefillin Mezuzot and the Tanakh. Now we're saying it can be because there's no Aramit in Tefillin Mezuzot. So now we're splitting it up. We're saying, no. It's not Tefillin. Tefillin Mezuzot is out of the question. We're not talking about that. We're talking about between Sefarim and Megillat Esther. Megillat Esther is, that means even though Megillat Esther is inside the Sefarim, because it's inside Tanakh, but it's a separate din. That's what we're trying to say. What does that mean? Megillat Maitama. What's the reasoning why Megillat Esther has to be written in a shurit and all the rest no? Meaning I could come and take Megillat Ruth, Megillat Shira Shirin, I could take Tehillim, I could take Mishle, I could do whatever I want and there's not a problem. Yeah, there's no problem, right? But I'm doing all these things, right? But one second, why is it all of a sudden the Megillah no? I could write everything, but not the Megillah. Why? So he says Dichtiv ba because it's written over there. Yeah, he says Dichtiv ba, it's written Kichtavam v'chilshonam. What does that mean, Kichtavam v'chilshonam? It means you always have to write it in Ktav HaShurit el Lashon HaKodesh, just like it was written in the beginning. And the Megillah was written Kichtavam v'chilshonam. Kichtavam v'chilshonam means like their language and like their writing. So it always has to be in the same thing. You cannot change from the way that it was written. So says the Gemara, okay, fine. Now makes sense, right? It's a special din. Before we had a special din in Tefillin Mezuzot that it had to be in Hebrew and you can't write in every other language. And now we have a special din in the Megillah. Okay, okay. Now we're going to go the other way around. My targum sheketvo mikra.
Rabbi.
Yes.
It means.
So says the Gemara, my targum sheketvo mikra. What is the targum that he wrote it as mikra? Right? What is the targum sheketvo mikra? So he comes and he says like this. He says, Rav Papa comes and he says, V'nishma pitgam hamelech. What does that mean, V'nishma pitgam hamelech? He comes and he says, right, as follows, right? Tienes platos. You got that? Yeah, he says, V'nishma pitgam hamelech. He says the pitgam is Aramit, right? Is Aramit. So what does that mean? It's mamash Aramit, it's Aramaic. So he says, right, because pitgam is davar, meaning, right, there's such a thing as a thing, right? Do me a favor, can you please close the door? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak comes and he says, V'chol anashim yitzenu yekar levalehen. Yekar is kavod. So therefore, here you have two different words in the Megillah, which is actually Aramit. Number one, pitgam. Pitgam, we even say it today in Hebrew, pitgam. But pitgam is Aramit. It's Aramit for davar. It's for a thing that's said, like a dictum, right? Next, yekar, right? Lasot yekar yoter mimeni. Yekar is also what? Is also going to be kavod. Okay? Ravashi comes and he says, Kitanya, when do we speak about this case? He comes and he says, when do we say until you have to write, until Ashurit and everything? The Shar Sfarim. This is talking about other Sfarim like Nevi'im Uktuvim and like Rabbi Yehuda, like Shitat Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah? So he comes and he says, the Tanya, as we learned in the Braita, right? Tefillin mezuzot and nichtavin ela ashurit. Right? Tefillin mezuzot is not going to be written unless it's going to be Ashurit. Ve'Rabbatenu itiru Yevanit. Rashbag, that's his Rabbotenu in this case, he permitted it in Yevanit. Okay? So says the Gemara, V'akti Vayu. 1 second, I thought it was written Vayu. By Tfilin Mezuzot, I thought it was written Vayu. Vayu means that you cannot write in any other language. So answers the Gemara, Ela Eima Sefarim Nichtavim B'chol Lashon, Ve'Rabotenu itiru. You're right, only Sefarim were written in any language. Ve'Rabotenu itiru Yevanit. And the rabbis were the ones that permitted Yevanit. Okay? Says the Gemara, Hitiru Mikal de Tanakama Asad. If you're going to say that Hitiru means that the Tanakama, which was before Rabotenu, they obviously what? They prohibited it. Ela Eima, and that's not true, because the rabbi is permitted to write Sefarim B'chol Lashon. So answers the Gemara, Ela Eima Rabotenu lo Hitiru shikatvu ella Yevanit. Rabotenu, remember, Rabotenu here is referring to Rashbag, Rabban Shimon Gamliel. And here it's saying that Rabban Shimon Gamliel only permitted it in Yevanit other than Lashon HaKodesh. Meaning, according to him, it's either Lashon HaKodesh or Yevanit. Special din in Yevanit. So says the Gemara, V'tanya, we learned to the right, Amar Yehuda says of Yehuda, Av keshitiru Rabotenu Yevanit, lo itiru as b'sefer Torah. Mishum ma'aseh de Talmai HaMelech. Do you know even when Rashbag permitted Yevanit, it wasn't Yevanit permitted on what? On all of Tanakh. It was only the Sefer Torah. Why was it only the Sefer Torah? Because of the story of Talmai HaMelech, which we're going to bring down now. What was the story of Talmai HaMelech? No? Anybody remembers? This is, by the way, this is Asara B'Tevet, right? We're going to see. The Tanya we learned in the Braita, Maaseh Talmai HaMelech, Shekines 72 Zekenim. There was a story of Talmai king, right? Talmai the king, he was the king of Mitzrayim, as Rashi says. And what happened is that he gathered in together 72 elders of the Jews. So he gathered in 72 Zekenim. He put them in 72 different rooms, different houses. He didn't tell them what they're doing. He just comes, boom, one house, another house, 72. What happened? He went into every single one. He told them, write for me the Sefer Torah in Yevanit. Yeah? HaKadosh Baruch Hu came, right? And he gave all of them the same advice. And they all wrote down the exact same thing. And they read. Now, the galut here, I think people don't even understand. The reason why people don't understand it is because they don't understand what's going on. Do you know, I remember once hearing from one of the big Rabbanim that the hardest job is to translate a Sidur, or to translate the Chumash. Why do you think Targum had to be Halakha Moshe Sinai? Because the translation is so difficult. You know why? Because we already mentioned this in the past. Shema could mean to listen, could mean to hear, to hearken, to accept, to understand. There's so many, you could write it in so many different languages. Like, what do you translate it as? Shema Yisrael, listen Israel. What does listen? Does it just mean to listen? But it doesn't mean you have to accept it. You have to understand it. There's so many. And that's why the interpretations are so many. It's so vast. How are you going? And you're not doing that just for one parasha. Do that for the entire Torah. You know what that is? In every single one. Right? And that you could have for everything, by the way. There's so many times in the Torah where you have a word, and Rashi says, you know what? One explanation is like this, other explanation ketargumo, like the targum. Another, meaning that you see that there's many different interpretations. Now, every single one is going to say the exact same.
In French, we said traduire, c'est trahir.
What does that mean?
Translate is
Not to betray.
Is a betray. Why? Because it's impossible. It's basically impossible, right?
You always take one angle.
Exactly, one angle and not the other one. So here, every single one, for example, right? For example, right? Are you listening? One of them, for example, is Bereshit bara Elokim. 1 second. It says Bereshit bara Elokim. If you translate that literally, what does that mean? That Bereshit, whoever that is, created God. If you're translating, right? I'm giving you a job. You're a translator. You put it in Google Translate. You put down Bereshit bara Elokim. What does it mean? Bereshit created God. That's what you're reading. But what? They all came and they all wrote Elokim bara Bereshit. That Hashem created Bereshit. He created at the beginning et Hashem et Haaretz. That means they came and they all changed it in order not to think that maybe Bereshit is a God and he created our God. So therefore, everybody, 72, all thought of it, boom, they all changed it. Right? Esev Adam b'tzelmo v'dmut. it says in the Torah, "Vayomer Elokim na'aseh Adam," we are going to do. Who's we? So he said, they all translated I am going to do it, a human being at Etzelul Lumut. Vaychal bayom hashishi, vayishvo bayom hashavi'i. We say Vaychal Elokim bayom hashavi'i, and then vayishvo bayom hashavi'i, which means that he finished on the 7th day and he rested on the 7th day. They wrote no, that he finished on the 6th day and he rested on the 7th day in order to make sure that we didn't do any milacha on the 7th day. Okay? Because basically they didn't want to accept the drasha of the Chachamim, because he knew that they weren't going to start, he wasn't going to start coming and saying, the rabbi said this, the rabbi said that. It wasn't all those things. Okay? Zacharun keva bera'o, velo katvu bera'am. He comes and he says, Zacharun keva, right? Bera'o, instead of bera'am. What does that mean? B'lashon rabim. What does it mean, b'lashon rabim? He comes and he says, right, in order that they shouldn't come and be over stira on the psukim. Okay? So therefore, because he created b'lashon yachid, bera'o, he created it, not bera'am, that they created them. Hava ereda ve'avela sham sifatam, the same thing. Instead of hava nereda, that we are going to go down, was HaKadosh Baruch Hu and also Parmalia Shemala, his entire entourage. Right? No, it was only him. Hava ereda ve'avela sham sifatam. But Yitzchak Sarah bikroveha, not bikidbah. Right? Because if not, why was HaKadosh Baruch Hu only makpid on Sarah, that she was laughing, and not on Avraham? So therefore it says bikroveha. Bikroveha means in front of other people. So it's kilu HaKadosh Baruch Hu was makpid on Sarah, that she was laughing in front of other people. That's why he was upset at her and not Abraham. Because if it was inside of her, what's the big deal? Okay, so she's laughing. Okay.
So to have that interpretation.
In this past week's parasha, it says ki be'apam haregu ish haregu shor uvirtzonam yikru evus. It didn't make sense, because if you're going to tell me now that the children of Yaakov Avinu were so upset they wanted to kill a human being, and they wanted to come and they wanted to uproot, right? Shor, what's going on here? So they changed it. Instead of ki be'apam haregu ish, ki be'apam haregu shor. They killed an ox. They didn't kill a human being. Uvirtzonam yikru, and then they came and they uprooted. Right? Because if not, they're going to be like, what's going on here? You know, the Jews came and they got so upset, they started killing out. What's going on? Instead of saying that Moshe Rabbeinu, he put his wife and children on top of the chamor, right? He went and he said, Noseh b'nei Adam. Right? He says, why? Because if not, they're going to say that, why didn't he put it on a sus, on a horse, or whatever it is? Why on a chamor? Chamor is for the cheap people. It sounds like what? Moshe Rabbeinu was an ani? He didn't have any money. He's going to use, instead of using, I don't know what, a simple car, right? He has to use a BMW, right? Rolls Royce. You understand? Bentley. These things.
The mother of the Masechet is always recognized with a hammer.
Oh, yeah?
Of course, she was always
100%. That's why the Mashiach and everything. But the Goy will not understand that. So they had to come and they had to change it. They had to add in that Bnei Yisrael were also in other lands for the 430 years. It didn't just say they were in Eretz Yisrael for it wasn't true. They weren't in the land of Egypt for 400. So they translated that. Vayishlach et zatute b'nei Yisrael, when it's written that vayishlach et na'areh b'nei Yisrael, the children of b'nei Yisrael, it says zatute. Zatute is the ones of which are the lower ones, because na'areh, na'ar is like a derogatory form of saying like a child. This is zatute, is like the younger one. He didn't actually touch them. Tet Amubet 9b. Lo chamad, lo chemed echad mehem nasati. Right. This is during the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, it says that he didn't take nothing from the people. So when he said that he didn't benefit nothing from the people, it says over there lo chamor. Instead of saying lo chamor echad mehem nasati, it says lo chemed echad mehem, which mashma I didn't take nothing. Walo, not only just a chamor, nothing. Okay. Then it says, Asher chalak, Hashem lokecha otam la'id lechol ha'amim. It says over there that basically HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving otam lechol ha'amim, tachat kol ha'shamayim, it says la'id lechol ha'amim, which means that they added in the word leha'id in order not to make a mistake that it's a goy, right, is permitted in Avodah Zarah, right? But rather a goy is also prohibited in Avodah Zarah. That's why it says that we were supposed to illuminate the nations, okay? Vayelech vayavod Elokim acharim asher lo tziviti leovdam. So it says, "Vayelech vayavod Elohim acharim v'yishtachavu lahem." So where it says "v'yishtachu lahem," it just says "asher lo tziviti leovdam," that it didn't command them to actually serve, which means the same thing, that it didn't come and for sure the HaKadosh Baruch Hu has koach elakut, right? Because everything is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. וכתבו לו את צעירת הרגליים. They didn't write the arnevet. Why didn't they write the arnevet? Remember, the arnevet is extinct nowadays.
Yeah.
We don't know what it is. It could be a type of a rabbit, a type of a rabbit. But basically, it's extinct nowadays. But it says here, what?
That was part of their life.
Exactly. No, but not part of the life. Why? The name of the queen was Arnevet. So if they're going to say that you're not allowed to eat the Arnevet, right? They're going to say, so you're not allowed to eat the queen. Like, well, what's going on? And you sound like, what? So they changed the name. They said, what is the Arnevet? Tzirat haraglaim, the one which is very quick, right? Sorry, not quick. That it's got very short legs. Okay. Shelo yomar, so they shouldn't say sachku bi hayudim v'tilu shem ishti b'Torah. So ki'ilu that the Torah, right, is coming, right, and the Torah is making they're making fun of me, so they put my wife in the Torah. You know, that's what he's gonna say. Rashbag omer so nekuda. Okay. Rashbag omer, Rabban Shimon Gamliel says, "Af besfarim lo itilu sheketvu la Yavanit." They only permitted Yavanit. Amar Rabbi Yavu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yavu, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, halacha is like Rashbag, right? That you're only allowed to write it in Yavanit or Ashurit. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, my time at Rashbag, what's the reasoning of Rashbag? Amar Kat says in the pasuk, Yaft Elokim leyefet v'yishkom ba'ol Hashem. What does that mean? Dvarav shel Yefet yu ba'ol Hashem. The words, which is Yavanit, Yavan was the children of Yefet. Right? Benef Yefet Gomen uMagog Yavan v'Tuval. Right? It says Yavan. Yavan is the third. Right? Yavan is the fourth. Actually, I think it is of Yefet. So it says over here, the words of Yavan will be ba'ol Hashem in the tense of Shem. So therefore, the Torah will be also written in Yavanit. Ve'ema Gomen uMagog. Says the Gemara. Maybe it's Gomen uMagog. Says Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Hainu Tama. That's what's written in the Torah. Dichtiv Yaft Elokim liyefet. Yafiuto shel Yefet. The beauty of Yefet. What is the beautiful language of Yefet? Yevanit, Yebel Hashem. Only the most, la creme de la creme. That's the only thing which is going to be in our Hashem. Okay, Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Em ben Kohen Mashuach l'Shem and Mishcha l'Kohen merubeh begadim. There's no difference in a Kohen, which is Mashuach l'Shem and Mishcha. Remember, Mashuach l'Shem and Mishcha means he became a Kohen Gadol when they come and they anoint him. Right? They come and they pour on him. Right? They pour on him this anointing oil, and now he becomes Mashuach l'Shem and Mishcha. So he says this for the Kohen Gadol. And the Kohen Gadol, which is merubeh begadim, which means that he was appointed just by having more clothing. Remember that in especially the second Bet HaMikdash, right? They did not have the Shem and Mishcha. So therefore, they were merubeh begadim. They just had more clothing. They had, instead of 4, they had 8. Ela parabal kol mitzvot, but rather parabal kol mitzvot, which means the Kohen HaMashuach, the Shem and Mishcha, if by accident he paskin the halacha, which they were chayav karet for it, and they did accordingly, he has to bring a par chatat, as it says in the pasuk, "Im Kohen HaMashiach yechta lashmat ha'am, v'yikriv achato asher chata par ben bakar tamim l'Hashem lechatat." It's in Vayikra. Okay, so he says now Kohen merubeh begadim, he doesn't bring omi hakispa or seira like a chatat yachid because he's not of the rabbin. So says the Gemara, the Mishnah, "Em ben Kohen meshamesh leKohen shavar ela par yom kippurim v'asirit ha'efa." There's also no difference between a Kohen Gadol, that he was a Kohen Gadol mamash meshamesh, means he's a Kohen Gadol now, and a Kohen Shavar. Kohen Shavar means is that there was a psul and he was taken off of his place. So he was like retired, right? So what's the difference between them? The difference between them is, right, shepar yom kippurim. Par yom kippurim means that they brings the Kohen Gadol lechaper ba'ado vad beto, right? And also minchat chavitin of the Kohen Gadol and the sirit ha'efa, the 10th of the flour. So all those things is only the Kohen Meshamesh, right? Why? Because 2 people cannot bring it. So you cannot have 2 Kohanim bringing it. So it's only the Kohen which is Meshamesh and not the Kohen Shavar. Okay, but other than that, the Kohen Shavar, he could bring whatever, he could do whatever he wants. Okay? Says the Gemara, Ha linyan par yom kippurim. But to do the par yom kippurim, right? V'asirit ha'efa and the sirit ha'efa, ze v'ze, both of them are going to be shavim. What does it mean both of them are going to be shavim? Both of them are going to be shavim, that just like the Mashuach B'Shem and Mishcha is going to bring par yom kippurim, v'asirit ha'efa, so tu merubeh begadim. That means as long as it's a Kohen Gadol which is Mishamesh now, I don't care how he became a Kohen Gadol, whether it's with the Shem and Mishcha or just merubeh begadim, it's the same halacha. But the difference between a Kohen Mishamesh and Kohen She'avar means that he already retired. That there is a difference. And the first one, there's no difference. So Matniti in our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, as if it's going to be like Rabbi Meir. Atanya, we learned in the Braita, merubeh begadim mevi parabak kol mitzvot. Rabbi Meir, chachamim omrim eno mevi. So our Mishnah has to be like Rabbi Meir, because according to Rabbi Meir, even a merubeh begadim can bring a parabal kol mitzvot. But according to the Chachamim, it's only a Kohen, which is Mashuach, Shemen HaMishcha. Okay? What's the reasoning of Rabbi Meir? The time as we learned in the Braita, it says Mashiach. What does that mean, Mashiach? It says Eli ela Mashuach Shemen HaMishcha. That's only a Kohen, which is going to be Mashuach Shemen HaMishcha. Merubeh begadim minayin. How do we know also Merubeh begadim is going to bring a para Mashuach, a para Bal Kol Chatzat? He says, Tamunumara Mashiach, HaMashiach, the extra hay. So with the extra hay is coming to include that even if it was just extra, right, extra clothing, that's also enough. So says the Gemara, why do you say that the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir? Let's see the Seifa. The Seifa says there's no difference between Kohen Meshamesh, the Kohen Shabat, Ela, Par Yom Kippurim, Masechet Megillah Daf, Halachol Divrehem, but everything else is Shavin. So that is like Rabbi Meir. So why are you telling me that the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir? The Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir. Because remember, we're saying the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir, was the Reisha of the Mishnah said that we do not bring a par chatat, right, on Kohen, which is al-kol merubeh begadim, only a Kohen, which is Mashuach b'mechmar. Rabbi Meir says, yes, that you could because of the extra hay. So the Gemara says, what about the Seifa? So says the Gemara, the time we learned to the Braita, imagine right now there was a psul in the Kohen Gadol. And they anointed another Kohen tachtav. Harishon chozer la'avodato. Right, the first one, he goes back to work. Ve'asheni, kol mitzvot kehuna gadola alav. He still is able. He still has all the mitzvot kehuna gadola. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Now, according to Shitat Rabbi Meir, right, we put a substitute Kohen Gadol. He still stays like a Kohen Gadol afterwards. What do you mean? The first one goes back to work, but he still is able to keep the clothing, right, the honors, right? So he says, Rabbi Yosef Omer, no. Harishon chozer la'avodato. The first one goes back to work. He's not nothing. He's not a Kohen Gadol, not a Kohen Idiot.
So what is
right?
he going to do with the clothing?
No, nothing. What's a Geniza? So it says, Rabbi Yosef, says Rabbi Yosef, Masechet Rabbi Yosef ben Ulam mitzipori. There was a story of Rabbi Yosef ben Ulam from Tzipori. Shirabo psul be Kohen Gadol, but there was a psul that happened in the Kohen Gadol. Minuhu, so they put Rabbi Yosef ben Ulam instead of him, instead of the Kohen Gadol. And they came in front of the Chachamim. And they said that the first one goes back to his original work. The second one cannot be not Kohen Gadol. Why not? It says Kohen Gadol Mishum Eva. You cannot have two heads. Why can't you have two heads? Eva. It causes animosity. Right? Animosity. It's a problem. So what happened? This guy was a Kohen Gadol. Which one? Yeah, but here we're talking even Kohanim Gadolim. We're not talking about Amcha. Even between two Kohanim Gadolim, you're going to have animosity. So what happened? The Chachamim say only one could be Kohen Gadol. The other one cannot be Kohen Gadol. What about Kohen Idiot? He says, Mishum Ma'alim B'Kodesh V'lo Moridin. You only go up in Kiddushan, you don't go down. So the fact that you only go up in Kiddushan, you don't go down, right? He already went up to become a Kohen Gadol. He cannot become down to become a Kohen Idiot anymore. But he can't be Kohen Gadol either because of animosity. So what do? Nothing. He's not a Kohen Gadol, he's not a Kohen Idiot. So basically, you brought him up in life, but then afterwards he lost even what he had. Yeah, he misses everything. So says the Gemara, Reisha Rabbanan, the Sefer Rabbi. So it comes out that the Reisha is going according to Rabbanan. Is according to Rabbanan, Merubeh begadim does not bring a par al chatato, and the Sefer is going according to Rabbi Meir. So Amar Rav Chasta says, Rav Chasta, you're right, yes. Because basically, right, that could happen once in a while. It's not the best, but we do answer this once in a while. The once in a while, you could have a Mishnah. The Reisha is one rabbi, and the Sefer is another rabbi. You're right. Amar Rav Chasta, in Reisha Rabbanan, the Sefer Rabbi Meir. Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef says, no, I don't want to say that. Rebbe, really, be'emet, our Mishnah, the entire thing is like Rebbe. V'nasiv la aliba de Tanaim, but he's going according to Machloket Tanaim. But it's to do with the Reisha, what's to do with he was holding like the Chachamim, which is Merubeh begadim does not bring it. But to do with the Sefer, he held like Rabbi Meir, meaning that Rebbe himself was Machriya. And he said, in the Reisha, I hold like Chachamim, and the Sefer, I hold like Rabbi Meir. And that's what we're doing. Okay? Very good. Says the next Mishnah. Mishnah on the bottom of Tet Amud Aleph. Tet Amud Bet, sorry. We're on the second last Mishnah, but there's two Mishnahs out here. En ben bama gedola lebama ktana lepsachim. In the olden days, we used to have barbecues. You know what barbecues were? They were like bamot. Bamot was like we're going to say it was the altar, but a private altar. It's a bama. So he says here, there's no difference between a bama gedola, which is a big one, that for example, the mizbeach that Moshe did and it was in Nov and Givon, or Bama Ktana, which is basically your private backyard barbecue, so you did your own mizbeach, Ela Psachim, only do it Psachim. The Psachim, Korban Pesach, could only be brought on a Bama Gdola, not on a Bama Ktana. Zeh Kelal, this is the general rule. Kol Shu Nidar v'Nidav, anything which is going to be given as a Nidara or a Neder, as a promise or a present, Kareb Bama can be brought as a Bama Ktana. But anything which is not Nidar v'Nidav, but comes as an obligation, as a Chovah, is not brought in a Bama Ktana, it could only be brought in Bama Gdola. That means anything which is a promise or present, that, no problem. That could be on a private barbecue, but anything which is an obligation, Bama Gdola. Says the Gemara, Psachim v'tulo. He says, what? It's only Psachim, nothing else? So says the Gemara, no, you're right. Ema ke'en Psachim. Anything which is like Psachim, right? Anything which is like the Psachim, which means that there's other things as well. Anything which is like a Korban Pesach, which has to have a set time and sort of money. Who is this? Rabbi Shimon is like Rabbi Shimon. The time was we learned to the right. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Af tzibur lo yikrivu el psachim v'chovot, right? Shekvu alaim zman. Also, the Bama Gdola, from all the Korbanot Chovah, they only brought the psachim and the chovot, which is an obligation to fix time. But chovot she'enan kvu alaim zman, hacha ve'hacha lo karev. You don't bring a non Bama Gdola or non Bama Ktana. So therefore, you cannot say that Rami Mishnah is like Shitat Chachamim, because according to them, you could bring a Korban Tzibur. The Tzibur could bring a Korban on a Bama Gdola, whatever they wanted. And even Korbanot Chovah, which is not Kavu Alaim Zman, it says no. It's only when they had a Kavu Alaim Zman. If it has a fixed time, they brought it. If it didn't have a fixed time, they didn't bring it. So it's like Ke'en Psachim. It's like the Psachim. It has to be Kavu Zman. And in the Psachim, it's a fixed time. It's always brought when? When is the Korban Pesach brought? Erev Pesach, 14. Right, on the 14th, after Chatzot. Okay? We learned Psachim already. Yeah, you remember? Yes, we learned Psachim. Very good. En ben Shiloh l'Yerushalayim. Right? You have to remember that after 14 years, right, that Bnei Yisrael came into Eretz Yisrael, it was remember that it took them 7 years the kivush and 7 years the chalukah, 7 years to conquer it and 7 years to divide it. So therefore, what happened was after the 14 years, they had a Mishkan in Shiloh. And it was there for 369 years until it was destroyed. So now we're going we're going to see over here, we're going to start speaking about the different things about the Bamot or the Mishkans and things like that. Em ben Shiloh l'Yerushalayim. There's no difference between the Mishkan that was in Shiloh and the Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Ela shebeshilo ochlim kadashim kalim ma'aser sheni b'chol haroeh. By Shiloh, you could eat kadashim kalim or ma'aser sheni b'chol haroeh. B'chol haroeh means any place where you could see the Mishkan Shiloh. It means as long as you could see the Mishkan, you could eat Maaser Sheni, right? If you had the view. Yeah, if you had the view. Yeah, you're allowed to do it. Yerushalayim, it has to be lifnim min hachuma. It has to be inside the walls of Jerusalem. Okay? Vekan, but both in Shiloh and Yerushalayim. Kadashe Kadashim, whether we're talking about Kodesh Kadashim and are they going to be eaten? Lifnim min hakilayim, right? Inside the Kilei HaChatzer of the Mishkan, and Yerushalayim inside the Chomot HaZarah. Okay? Which is like the Kilei HaChatzer of the Mishkan. Which means that there's going to be, that means by both of the to do with Kodesh Kadashim, it's the same halacha. It has to be either inside the curtains or inside of the wall. But to do with the difference between Kadashim Kalim, that there's a big difference, whether it's Bechol HaRoeh or, right, Lifnim min hachoma. Okay, next. Kiddushat Shiloh. Kiddusha of Shiloh, Yesh Acharei Heter. Yudah Mudalev says there is a heter afterwards, because after it was destroyed, right, they were still allowed to come and bring on Bamot. Kiddushat Yerushalayim and Acharei Heter. But after Kiddushat Yerushalayim, there's no heter. That means once the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, you're never allowed to come and bring on a Bama. So that's going to be a very important halacha. That's why nowadays we can't bring a korban. Why can you bring a korban? Because there's no heter afterwards. After Yerushalayim, there's no heter to bring up. Beforehand, there was for Yerushalayim. Okay, we continue with Hashem tomorrow with the Gemara.